I hadn't felt hope in months, until I found myself tearing a warm loaf of bread in half, tears pricking my eyes even before I realized why. The cafe's door creaked open, and in walked the man who'd soon change everything, gaunt, desperate, and utterly unrecognizable. I gripped that half loaf like it was a lifeline, because in that moment, it was. I used to believe I was invisible, not in a romantic way, not in the sense of being free, but in the suffocating way of someone slipping through cracks no one bothered to seal. Life was just noise and repetition, the hiss of the diner's griddle at dawn, the smell of old books at dusk, the endless clicking of a time clock. Coins clinked in my pocket like an accusation. Never enough, always counted twice. I walked the city in a daze, half alive, clinging to the smallest rituals just to prove I still existed. That Wednesday morning, I sat shivering on the radiator in my paper-thin pajamas, watching frost crawl along my apartment window. My account balance had dipped below zero, rent was past due, and hunger gnawed so loud it echoed in my chest. I kissed my pillow goodbye, like it was an anchor I couldn't afford to carry, and stepped into the icy street. The cafe was my last refuge, not because it welcomed me. No, it barely tolerated me, but because it opened before the world did. Mrs. Patel ran it with a weary indifference that left me free to vanish in a corner booth. That morning, I traded my final $2 for a single slice of bread, toasted unevenly, edges charred. It cost $1.97. I tucked the last 3 cents into my coat pocket, tiny coins that jingled like a cruel joke. I slid into my corner booth beneath the flickering open sign, cradling the plate as though it were treasure. The smell was faint, but comforting, the heat barely enough to thaw my fingertips. I knew I should eat quickly and rush to work, but something held me still. The bread felt symbolic, like more than food, like survival itself resting in my hands. Then the door creaked open. He stumbled in, coat hanging from one shoulder, collar torn, shoes splitting at the seams. His face was hollow, cheeks caved, eyes shadowed with exhaustion deeper than anything I'd ever carried. He froze at the threshold, clutching an empty paper cup, scanning the room with the desperation of someone who'd been turned away too many times. His gaze landed on me, sharp yet pleading, and in that instant, the cafe's hum disappeared. My mind screamed, "Don't get involved. You're barely surviving." But another voice, softer and older, whispered, "Give what you can. Kindness is the last thing poverty can steal." My grandmother's wisdom had always sounded poetic in her warm kitchen. Now it roared inside me like a command. I tore the bread in half. Crumbs fell into my lap, my heart pounding so loud I thought he could hear it. Without looking away, I slid the plate across the table. He hesitated. Disbelief flickered across his face before he lowered himself into the chair opposite me. His hands shook as he picked up the bread, and when he whispered, "Thank you," the sound lodged in my chest like a stone. He ate slowly, reverently, chewing as though each bite carried memory, warmth, dignity. Time seemed to bend. Behind us, trays clattered, neon buzzed, but none of it reached me. My hunger faded, replaced by something sharper, the realization that a simple act could alter 2 lives at once. When he finished, he surprised me. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a napkin, and placed the other half of the bread, my half, back on the table, untouched. I frowned, confused. Why return it? Did he think I needed it more? Was he ashamed to accept charity? I tried to push it back, but he shook his head and rose. His coat slipped as he left, vanishing into the gray drizzle. The seat across from me was empty, yet heavy with presence. I stared at the napkin-wrapped loaf for the rest of the day, at work, on the bus, in my tiny kitchen. I couldn't eat it. It wasn't just bread anymore. It was a message I couldn't yet decipher. Proof that even in hunger, dignity survived. Proof that kindness had weight. That night, lying awake, I pressed my palm to my chest and whispered to the darkness, Who was he? Why leave it behind? Silence offered no answer. But I knew one thing. This was not the last time our paths would cross. Something had begun. That night, as I pressed my palm over my pounding heart, a single question echoed louder than any fear. Who was he, really? And why did fate insist we cross paths again? I didn't know then that hours later an email would shatter my world. I didn't know that the man who returned my bread would soon sit across from me, no longer a stranger, but my boss. And I certainly didn't anticipate that the same kindness I offered would become the leverage that bound me to him forever. By Monday, my life was supposed to resume its quiet unraveling, until the subject line of an email stopped me cold. It didn't read, "Final notice" or "termination." It read something I never dared dream. "You're invited." In my inbox of bills and reminders, this one message shimmered like a lifeline. Monday mornings had always felt like slow suffocation. My phone alarm screamed at 5:45, dragging me out of a shallow, restless sleep. I brewed instant coffee with water that tasted like rust, tied my hair back with a frayed elastic, and pulled on my uniform. The mirror showed a pale, hollow-eyed version of me. My reflection almost laughed, as if to say, "Another week of barely holding on." I trudged through drizzle to the bookstore, clutching my tote with yesterday's uneaten bread still wrapped inside. It had become a strange talisman. Customers filed in all morning, students asking for textbooks, mothers with toddlers tugging at their coats, men in suits barking into phones. I smiled when necessary, rang up purchases, stacked novels. Inside, though, my mind churned. The stranger's hollow eyes haunted me, that napkin bundle still heavy in my bag. At noon, I escaped to the break room. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh pallor. I sipped burnt coffee, unlocked my phone, and swiped through junk mail. Overdue notices, reminders, promotions. And then I froze. The subject line read, "You're invited." At first I assumed it was spam. I nearly deleted it, but curiosity tugged. My thumb hovered, then tapped. The message opened to reveal an embossed crest in the header, 2 lions flanking an ornate shield. My breath hitched. The email read, "Ms. Turner, you are cordially invited to attend a private dinner hosted at Ashton International Tower. Your presence has been specifically requested by our Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Henry Ashton. Kindly RSVP no later than 6 p.m. today." I blinked. Ashton International. The name alone pulsed with power. Everyone in the city knew it. Skyscrapers branded with the crest, news headlines filled with its deals, fortunes made and lost at its whim. And Henry Ashton. The man was a legend, a ghost, a titan whose face rarely appeared in public. What could he possibly want with me? For a moment I convinced myself it was a scam, but the details were too precise. The date, the address, the contact signature with a direct phone line. My hands shook as I reread it, heart thundering louder each time. Why me? Why now? Could this connect to the man from the cafe? I tried to dismiss the thought. That man was destitute, fragile. Henry Ashton was untouchable, commanding. They couldn't possibly be the same person. Yet my instincts whispered otherwise, threading the two together in ways logic couldn't. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't focus on work. Every book spine blurred, every customer's voice drowned beneath the drumbeat of the email. I paced between aisles, phone clenched, pulse racing. Should I respond? What if it was a mistake? What if I walked into humiliation? Or worse. At 4, I slipped into the alley behind the store, dialing the contact number with trembling fingers. After 2 rings, a crisp female voice answered, "Ashton International. Ms. Turner, we've been expecting your call." The words nearly buckled my knees. Expecting me. This was no mistake. The assistant confirmed the dinner at 7 p.m. sharp, attire formal. She rattled off instructions about the private elevator, the floor number, The timing. My hand scribbled notes onto the back of a receipt, ink smudging under sweat. By the time I hung up, my legs shook. This wasn't just real, it was imminent. I stumbled home, flung open my closet, and nearly cried. My wardrobe consisted of diner uniforms, worn sweaters, and discount jeans. Nothing came close to formal. I collapsed onto the bed, panic clawing at my chest. And then I remembered. A dress tucked deep in a box beneath the bed. Navy blue, simple but elegant, worn only once for my grandmother's memorial. I pulled it out, pressed the wrinkles flat, and prayed it would be enough. As dusk fell, I stood before the mirror again. The woman staring back wasn't glamorous, but she was steady. The bread in my tote whispered of humility. The email in my inbox blazed with destiny. Somehow, both belonged to me. I left my apartment trembling, clutching my only decent purse, whispering prayers under my breath. I didn't know if this invitation was salvation or a trap. I didn't know if I was walking into opportunity or into the hands of the very stranger who had already unsettled my life. But as the city lights flickered alive, one truth burned in my chest. Whatever awaited me at Ashton Tower would change everything forever. The elevator doors slid open, and for a heartbeat I forgot how to breathe. It wasn't just wealth that glowed from that penthouse, it was power, and it terrified me. And then I saw him, the stranger from the cafe, transformed into a man I could hardly recognize. The ride up Ashton Tower felt endless. Each floor number that blinked, 12, 18, 25, thudded in time with my pulse. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked foreign. Navy dress hugging my shoulders, hair pinned back, eyes too wide. I clenched my tote like armor, the bread still inside as though carrying a secret I couldn't release. At the top, the elevator hushed open. A corridor stretched before me, carpet thick and silent beneath heels that weren't used to such grandeur. At the far end, mahogany double doors swung wide to reveal a space I could never have imagined. The penthouse opened like a world apart. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a jeweled sea, lights shimmering violet and blue in the dusk. Plush rugs softened pale wood floors, while cream sofas faced a glass table dotted with crystal decanters. Art, real art, not prints, hung in gold frames, brushstrokes alive even in the dim light. I froze on the threshold, awe prickling with intimidation. Every detail whispered wealth, yet what struck me most was silence. This wasn't just luxury, it was solitude, curated and controlled. "Miss Turner?" A voice drew me in. I turned, and my breath caught. It was him, the stranger from the cafe, the gaunt man in the tattered coat. Only now he stood straight, his frame draped in a charcoal suit tailored to perfection. The hollow desperation was gone, replaced by composure so refined it felt unreal. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier, his eyes steady and sharp. For a moment, my mind refused the connection. My hands trembled as I clutched my tote tighter. "It's you." He smiled faintly, not with arrogance, but recognition. "Yes, it's me. Welcome to my home." I stumbled forward, confusion swirling. "But how? Who are you really?" He gestured to a leather chair, waiting until I sat before lowering himself across from me. "Henry Ashton," he said simply. "CEO of Ashton International." The title hung in the air like thunder. My chest tightened. This man, who had once accepted half a slice of bread with shaking hands, now revealed himself as one of the most powerful men alive. I could barely reconcile the two images. "You let me believe you were—" My voice faltered. "Hungry?" His eyes softened. "I was. Just not in the way you think. I needed to see kindness when no one knew my name. No one sought my favor. And you, May, gave it freely." His words cracked something inside me. Anger and awe tangled in my throat. "So, the cafe. The bread. It was a test." "No," he said firmly. "It was real. My hunger. Your generosity. All of it. But it also revealed something I had forgotten, that compassion can't be bought, only given. I wanted to argue, to demand answers. Instead, silence spread as I studied him. This man who carried two identities, one of power draped in glass towers, and one of fragility cloaked in rain, both equally true. At last, he leaned forward, resting a cuff-linked wrist on the table. I invited you here because I believe you see the world differently. You don't calculate profit before offering help. That's rare. His gaze pinned me, sharp but not cruel. And I want to build something with that perspective. My lips parted, words tangled. Build something. With me. I was nobody, just a girl drowning in overdue bills. He must have seen the storm in my expression because he added gently, "You don't have to answer tonight. But consider this. The act of kindness that bound us in that cafe may be the very thing that reshapes this city." The room blurred for a second as tears threatened. I blinked them back, shaking my head, trying to anchor myself. "Why me?" I whispered. "Because," he said softly, "you gave away your last bread when you had nothing. That tells me everything I need to know." The clock on the mantel chimed 7. Outside the glass walls, the city pulsed with neon and headlights. Inside, silence wrapped around us again, charged and unrelenting. I sat frozen, staring at the man I thought I knew, my pulse crashing like waves in my ears. He had been the stranger in the storm. Now he was the king of a tower. And between us lay a truth too impossible to ignore. My single act of compassion had tied me to one of the most powerful men in the world. And he wasn't done testing how far that compassion could take me. The table stretched endlessly, every dish gleaming, yet the air tasted of secrets. I had never sat at such a feast, yet I couldn't shake the feeling I was the one being consumed. Each bite carried flavor, but also questions, sharp and lingering. Dinner at Ashton Tower was like stepping into another world. The long oak table glittered with silver cutlery and crystal glasses, candles flickering in precise symmetry. Platters of roasted meats, steaming soups, and jeweled fruits lined the center, aromas mingling in a way that made my stomach growl, even as nerves tightened my throat. I had never been in a room so polished, so meticulously staged. Every chair had been placed with mathematical precision. Every glass gleamed as though polished by invisible hands. Yet the perfection only sharpened my unease. I didn't belong here. My thrift store navy dress, no matter how I smoothed it, looked out of place against satin gowns and tailored tuxedos. Henry sat at the head, commanding without raising his voice. He introduced me briefly. A guest of honor, and the phrase alone sent a ripple of curiosity through the room. Eyes darted toward me, some polite, some sharp with suspicion. I shifted in my chair, wishing I could shrink into the upholstery. The first course arrived, delicate bowls of golden soup. Steam curled upward, catching candlelight. I lifted my spoon slowly, conscious of every movement. Across the table, Henry's gaze lingered on me. Not unkind, but unreadable, as though studying a puzzle he alone could solve. "Tell me, May," one of the suited guests said, voice smooth but edged. "What brings you to Ashton Tower tonight?" I nearly dropped my spoon. My tongue felt heavy. The truth was too wild, that I had given half a loaf of bread to a stranger and somehow ended up here. So I stammered something vague about a shared encounter. A few guests nodded politely, others smirked as if dismissing me already. But Henry's smile deepened. "She's here," he said firmly, "because compassion deserves a seat at this table." His words silenced the whispers, but they ignited something else. Tension. Forks clinked, wine swirled, but I could feel the current shift. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others leaned back, arms folded. The dinner became less about food and more about scrutiny. The courses marched on. Spiced lamb, saffron rice, platters of gleaming vegetables. I tasted little, my stomach tight with nerves. Yet through every bite, I sensed layers beneath the flavors. Conversations hummed about stock markets, mergers, expansions. But threaded through the laughter were glances toward me, questions unspoken. Why was I here? What did I represent? Halfway through, a toast rose. A woman in emerald silk lifted her glass toward Henry. "To compassion," she said smoothly, "and to those bold enough to believe it can turn a profit." Laughter followed, light but edged. My cheeks burned. Henry clinked his glass, but his eyes never left mine. "To compassion," he echoed, but his tone held steel. By dessert, the tension thickened. Plates of chocolate and fruit gleamed untouched as whispers spread down the table. I felt exposed, like prey beneath a circle of hawks. Finally, I leaned closer to Henry and whispered, "Why am I really here?" He set down his fork, folded his hands, and for the first time that evening, his voice dropped low, almost intimate. "Because the world I live in runs on secrets. Tonight, you see them dressed as banquets, disguised as toasts. But one day soon, you'll understand. Your gift for kindness is the one thing they can't counterfeit." His words landed heavy. I looked around the glittering table again and realized, behind every smile lurked calculation, behind every toast, an agenda. I was not a guest. I was a test. The feast ended with applause for nothing in particular, guests drifting away into the night. But as I rose, Henry's hand brushed mine under the table, a silent anchor. As the last guest disappeared, Henry leaned close, his whisper slicing through the silence. "Everything you saw tonight, the questions, the masks, the suspicion, that was only the surface." My heart pounded. "Then what lies beneath?" His smile was calm, but his eyes burned. "Secrets powerful enough to destroy me, and anyone who dares to sit at my table." The paper on the desk wasn't just ink and clauses. It was a trap disguised as opportunity. I stared at the signature line, knowing one stroke could change my life forever. Every contract promises security, but this one whispered chains. The office was too quiet when I entered. City lights glittered beyond the glass walls, their reflections painting the polished floor in streaks of gold and blue. Henry sat at his desk, a fountain pen poised beside a folder thick with papers. He gestured toward the leather chair opposite him. "Sit," he said softly, but his tone carried the weight of command. I obeyed, my palms already damp. The folder lay between us like a sleeping animal, ordinary at first glance, but I sensed the danger beneath its stillness. He flipped it open, revealing pages of clauses typed in neat, unyielding font. My name appeared at the top, May Turner. "This," Henry said, tapping the first page, "is your contract." The word tasted heavy. My chest tightened as my eyes skimmed the lines. Non-disclosure, non-competition. Other duties as required. Each phrase sounded innocuous, yet together they felt like invisible chains. "You'll be compensated," he added calmly, "more than you've ever imagined. A salary, benefits, resources to make your dreams possible." His gaze sharpened. "But I need loyalty." Absolute loyalty, I swallowed hard. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. "When you have nothing, give what you can." But what would I give up if I signed? My freedom? My conscience? Henry leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "May, you have talent, heart, compassion. Those qualities are rare, but without protection, without structure, they burn out. This contract ensures you'll never struggle again," his words tempted me. Security, stability, an escape from scraping by in cafes and bookstores. Yet the fine print pulsed like warning sirens. Other duties could mean anything. Midnight deliveries, secrets carried under my name, shadows I might never crawl out from. I asked, voice unsteady, "What happens if I refuse?" He didn't flinch. "Then you walk away. Back to obscurity, back to waiting for landlords' calls and counting coins for bread." He paused, letting the silence sink. "But you won't refuse. Because you've already chosen. The moment you tore your slice in half, you stepped into my world. This is just the next step." My throat went dry. He was right. That single act of compassion had bound us. I thought of the feast, of the suspicious glances, of the weight of sitting at his table. Without this contract, I'd remain powerless. A guest always on the verge of being shown the door. With it, I'd belong. But belonging might cost more than I could bear. He slid the fountain pen toward me. Its gold nib gleamed under the desk lamp. My hand trembled as I picked it up. Every fiber of my being screamed, "Don't sign." But another voice whispered, "What choice do you have?" I pressed the nib to paper, hesitated. Henry's eyes locked on mine, steady, unwavering. "May," he said quietly, "trust me. This isn't a prison. It's a path, and every path requires a first step." The silence roared. I thought of Sarah, my roommate, who begged me to be careful. I thought of Daniel, my estranged uncle, whose warnings still echoed. I thought of my mother's legacy, buried by men like Henry, waiting to be unearthed. And then, with a shaky breath, I wrote my name. Ink flowed, binding me. The signature curved across the page, final and irreversible. The moment the last letter dried, I felt it. The weight of chains I couldn't see but knew were real. Henry smiled, a small, satisfied curve of his lips. He closed the folder with deliberate care and placed it in a locked drawer. "Congratulations," he said. "You've just entered a new world." I sat frozen, pen still in my hand, the echoes of my decision thrumming through me. This wasn't triumph. It was surrender. I had traded freedom for survival. Henry rose and extended his hand. Mechanically, I shook it. His grip was warm, steady, certain. Mine was clammy, uncertain. But the deal was sealed. As he released my hand, Henry leaned close, his whisper colder than the city lights outside. "Your first assignment begins at midnight. Be ready." My breath caught, dread prickling my skin. What had I just signed into? And what shadows awaited me when the clock struck 12? My phone buzzed at 11:58 p.m. "Deliver this package. No questions. Be discreet." The address was a string of numbers and letters I'd never seen, just coordinates in an industrial no-man's land. My chest tightened. I'd signed up for this, but I had no idea what I was carrying. By the time I grabbed my flashlight, the city had fallen silent, and the real test of loyalty had begun. The envelope was small, light, and far too innocent in appearance for the dread it carried. I stared at it on my desk as the clock ticked closer to midnight. My contract was barely a day old, yet already it demanded obedience. At 11:58 p.m., my phone buzzed. A single message glowed across the screen. Coordinates sent. Deliver package. No questions, I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, zipped it shut, and grabbed the flashlight I'd used during my bookstore shifts when the power flickered. My reflection in the dark window startled me. Eyes hollow, jaw clenched, hair pulled back too tightly. I barely recognized the woman staring back. The cab driver looked uneasy when I gave him the destination, an address buried in the industrial district. "Not much out there this time of night," he muttered, but he drove without further questions. We passed shuttered warehouses and silent factories. The glow of the city dimmed until only scattered street lamps lit the cracked pavement. When the GPS announced we had arrived, I stepped onto gravel that crunched like bones beneath my boots. Ahead stood a warehouse stamped with a faded number, 7B. A single bulb flickered above the steel door. The envelope in my pocket felt heavier with each step. The keypad beside the door had no instructions, but when I pressed the digits sent to my phone, the lock clicked. The door groaned open, revealing a cavernous interior that smelled of rust and dust. I raised my flashlight. Shadows leapt across concrete floors and stacks of forgotten crates. My footsteps echoed too loudly, announcing my trespass. Then I saw them. footprints in the thin layer of dust, fresh, leading deeper into the warehouse. My pulse quickened. I followed the trail to a stack of crates. One plank was ajar. I crouched, listening. Breathing, ragged, shallow, came from inside. I pried the plank loose and shone the light. A man cowered inside, bound at the wrists, eyes wide with fear. His suit was torn, his face smeared with grime. He flinched at the beam, then whispered hoarsely, "You shouldn't be here." My throat tightened. "Who are you?" He swallowed. "I worked for him. I was loyal until I asked the wrong questions." His gaze flicked to my coat pocket. "That package, it's a test. Deliver it, and you prove your loyalty. Refuse, and you end up like me." I stared at him, heart hammering. "Why you?" "Because I hesitated," he rasped. "And in this world, hesitation is betrayal." My flashlight trembled in my grip. I thought of Sarah's warnings, of Daniel's accusations, of my grandmother's words about kindness. But this wasn't kindness. This was control, calculated, cold, and absolute. The man's voice cracked. "If you free me, they'll come for you. If you walk away, they'll come for me again. Deliver it, and maybe you'll buy yourself time. That's all anyone ever buys here. Time." The envelope pressed against my ribs like a brand. I wanted to throw it away, to scream, to demand answers. Instead, I forced myself to step back. "I'm sorry," I whispered. His eyes burned with resignation as I turned. Footsteps echoed back through the cavern, each one heavier than the last. Outside, the night air hit me like ice. I hailed another cab and clutched the envelope until my knuckles ached. At Oakwood Residence, the gates opened without a guard. The mansion loomed, silent and waiting. I walked the path, the crunch of gravel unnerving in the silence. The front door opened before I knocked. Inside, golden light spilled across a grand foyer. A butler took the envelope without a word and disappeared into the shadows. My chest heaved, relief mixing with nausea. But as I turned to leave, a voice drifted down the staircase. Smooth, steady, unmistakable. "May." Henry stood at the landing, immaculate in a suit, his expression unreadable. "Well done." My pulse raced. I wanted to demand what was in the package, why the man in the warehouse had been left to rot, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I nodded faintly. He smiled. "You'll go far, if you keep following orders." I walked out into the night, my conscience burning. I arrived at Oakwood Residence trembling, the envelope burning against my side. The front gate clicked open. No guard, no instructions, just a dark walkway to the mansion beyond. My breath caught as I realized the drive inside wasn't the only thing I'd sacrificed tonight. Every step toward that door felt like sinking deeper into Henry's web. And when the lights finally came on, I would face someone I never expected, holding my fate in their hands. The man inside wasn't my boss. It was my childhood ghost. I froze in the foyer, the grand chandelier's light catching the face I thought I'd never see again. My breath caught as recognition slammed into me, harder than fear ever could. In that moment, the past clawed its way back into my world, threatening to swallow me whole. The foyer of Oakwood Residence glowed with wealth. Marble floors reflected the shimmer of a chandelier, and a staircase curled upward like an invitation and a warning. I stepped inside hesitantly, the package gone from my hands, but the weight of it still pressing against my chest. The air was too still, too rehearsed, like the house itself waited to judge me. Then I heard it, a shuffle behind me. I spun, flashlight beam slicing the silence. And there he was. Not Henry, not some faceless servant. My Uncle Daniel. His hair was streaked with gray, his suit frayed at the cuffs, but those eyes, deep, familiar, made my breath stop. "Uncle," I whispered. He flinched at the sound, his jaw tightening. For a moment we both stood frozen, two ghosts colliding in the present. Memories crashed into me. His laugh at the carnival, the smell of cotton candy, the night the police dragged him away. For years, he was nothing but a rumor. And now he stood here, in the belly of Henry's world. "What are you doing here?" I asked, voice trembling. His gaze flicked to the staircase. "Same as you." Surviving his games before I could speak again, footsteps echoed above us. Henry descended slowly, hands clasped behind his back, expression cool as marble. "Ah," he said smoothly. "So introductions aren't necessary." Daniel's eyes hardened. "You set this up." "You always do," Henry smiled faintly. "Family reunions are such clarifying moments, don't you think?" I turned to Daniel, desperate for answers. "Why are you here? Why did he keep you hidden?" Daniel's shoulders sagged. "Because I know the truth." He nodded toward Henry. "Your mother and his father co-founded Biomed. She gave everything: research, brilliance, vision. But when an accident happened in the lab, the blame fell on her. Our family lost everything. I tried to fight, but Henry's empire buried me." My stomach clenched. "You mean she was framed?" He nodded, eyes glistening. "Her name erased, her work stolen. That's the foundation of his empire." Henry's calm voice cut through. "Your uncle remembers events through the haze of bitterness. My father saved that company. Without him, your mother's discoveries would have died in notebooks." Anger surged in me. At the cost of her dignity? At the cost of my family's life. Daniel stepped closer, his voice raw. "He doesn't care about dignity. Only power. That package you delivered tonight. Proof he still plays the same game." The chandelier light glittered like shards above us, throwing fractured patterns across Henry's face. He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at me, measured, deliberate. "May, you have a choice. Align with me, and the past stays buried. Align with him." His smile thinned. "And you'll both be crushed." I glanced between them. Daniel, weary and bruised by years of exile, clinging to truth. Henry calm and commanding, holding the keys to survival. My heart twisted. Both paths led into fire. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph, worn at the edges. He placed it in my trembling hands. My mother, radiant, smiling beside Henry's father as they unveiled their first project. Pride shone in her eyes. Tears stung my vision. "She deserves better than a footnote," I whispered. Daniel's voice broke. "Then fight for her. Don't let him erase her legacy." Henry's gaze darkened. "Be very careful, May. Loyalty is everything in my world. Choose wrongly, and you'll regret it." The chandelier swayed slightly, as though the house itself felt the tension. My fingers curled around the photo. My mother's smile became my compass. I looked at Henry, then back at Daniel. My voice trembled, but it carried resolve. "I know where I stand." Daniel's voice trembled as he whispered, "She deserves more than a footnote in his history." I felt the weight of my next words crush me. "I'm with you." Henry's eyes narrowed, the chandelier's crystals dancing like warning signs. The walls of Oakwood residence seemed to close, in, echoing with secrets and broken trust. And in that charged hush, I realized my choice would define not just my future, but my mother's legacy as well. Trapped between loyalty to my blood and fear of my boss. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face in that photograph, my mother's hopeful smile beside the man who destroyed her. I realized that knowledge can be as dangerous as any weapon, and I understood that burying the past might cost me everything I've built. That night, I lay awake with the photograph pressed against my chest. My mother's smile radiated from it, bright and unbroken, even though I now knew the story behind it had been twisted into a lie. The chandelier's glare from Oakwood still burned in my eyes, and my uncle's trembling voice echoed in my head. She deserves more than a footnote. I couldn't shut it out. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her again, standing proud beside Henry's father, believing she'd finally built something that would change the world. and every time, the memory soured. Because that world had been stolen, her brilliance buried, her dignity shattered. Daniel wanted justice, Henry wanted loyalty, and I, stuck between them, felt like I was unraveling. By morning, I dragged myself to the office, exhausted, pretending to be fine. On the 23rd floor, everything gleamed as though untouched by shadows. The glass walls, the sculpted plants, the polished mahogany. My co-workers greeted me with polite smiles, but my chest was heavy with the knowledge I carried. I couldn't tell them. Couldn't tell anyone. Knowledge like this was dangerous. Every file, every photograph, every whispered accusation was a weapon that could wound either side. At lunch, I escaped to the cafe down the street. The neon open sign flickered above me, a mirror of the one from the day I'd first torn bread in half for a stranger. I ordered coffee, but barely tasted it. My hands shook as I pulled Daniel's folder from my bag. Inside were copies of the patents, the emails, the proof of my mother's role. Proof that Henry had rewritten history. My throat tightened as I thought of him. His calm eyes, his patient voice. He hadn't denied anything. He hadn't even tried to disguise his power. Loyalty is everything, he'd said. Which meant if I so much as hinted at betrayal, he'd crush me without hesitation. But silence. Silence meant complicity. Silence meant letting my mother fade further into history's shadows. That night, Daniel called. His voice was hushed, urgent. We can expose him. I've spoken to a journalist who's been chasing him for years. If we share what we know, if we share your access, we can finally bring him down. I clutched the phone, heart pounding. And if he finds out? Daniel exhaled. He already suspects. Why do you think he staged our meeting? He wanted you torn in half. He wanted you too afraid to choose, I am. Afraid, I admitted, my voice cracking. Good, Daniel said softly. Fear means you understand the risk, but courage means you act anyway. I hung up, my palms damp. His words were right, but courage felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. The next day, Henry summoned me. His office was dimly lit, curtains drawn against the morning sun. He gestured for me to sit across from him. A file lay open on his desk, my name printed across the top. You've been unsettled lately, he said, his voice quiet, controlled. I hope your uncle hasn't filled your head with stories. I forced myself to breathe. Stories, or truths. His gaze sharpened. The truth is a matter of perspective. What matters is loyalty. I gave you an opportunity others would beg for. I elevated you when no one else saw your worth. I can just as easily take it away. My throat closed. He was right. I had climbed higher than I ever dreamed. But at what price? I left his office shaking, the contract in my bag feeling heavier than iron chains. My cubicle felt like a cage, its sterile walls closing in. I opened my laptop and stared at the blank screen. One message to Daniel, one leaked file, and everything would shift. But could I survive the fallout? Could we survive it? That night, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. Sarah hovered nearby, worry etched into her face. You can't fight him, she whispered. He'll destroy you. I stared at the pages, my mother's signature scrawled in ink, her brilliance reduced to legal text. My chest ached. If I don't fight him, I said, I'll destroy myself. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Promise me you'll be careful. I nodded, though inside I knew careful wasn't enough. At 7 p.m., I sat across from Henry at a private dining room in the Garrison Club. The chandelier above us sparkled like 1,000 eyes, and the silence pressed heavy. He leaned forward, voice soft but edged like steel. May, he said, there are things better left buried. Digging too deep only ensures you're the one buried instead. I clenched my hands under the table, nails biting my palms. My mother's smile burned in my mind. I thought of Daniel's broken voice, Sarah's warning. I was caught in the center of a web spun tighter every day. And I understood at last. Silence wasn't safety. Silence was surrender. I opened my mouth to defend my mother's name, then closed it, weighing every syllable. Henry's expression shifted from cordiality to something darker, predatory. Across the table, my folder of evidence felt like a ticking time bomb. As I lay my napkin on my lap, I understood that tonight's dinner would decide more than my job. And in the hush before the first course, I realized that saying the wrong thing could unleash a storm I might not survive. The banquet hall glittered, but every eye felt like a blade. Crystal chandeliers cast diamond light over silent guests as though they were predators circling prey. My pulse thundered, each footstep toward the table a countdown to betrayal. And under all that opulence, I sensed a trap closing around me. The doors of the Garrison Club's ballroom opened with a slow creak, and the world inside nearly swallowed me whole. Light refracted from crystal chandeliers into 1,000 shards, scattering across marble floors like shattered glass. Guests in silk gowns and tailored tuxedos turned as I entered, their gazes sharp as scalpels. I felt stripped bare under their scrutiny, as though they could see every secret I carried. Maxwell stood at the head of the table, his midnight blue tuxedo gleaming beneath the spotlight. His smile was poised, practiced, dangerous. He extended a hand toward me. "Welcome," he said softly, the word cutting deeper than a shout. I crossed the hall slowly, every step loud in my ears. My pulse pounded as though counting down to something inevitable. When I finally reached him, he gestured to the seat opposite his. The long dining table, dressed in ivory linen and glittering silverware, had been set for two. Yet the silence of dozens of witnesses pressed around us like invisible walls. The first course arrived, shrimp ceviche arranged like a work of art. But I couldn't taste it. Maxwell lifted his goblet, the crystal catching firelight. "To new beginnings," he said. His eyes narrowed slightly. "And to honesty." I swallowed hard and raised my glass, though the champagne burned like acid. I'd promised myself I'd speak tonight, that I'd demand the truth about my mother. But as he watched me, as those silent witnesses leaned forward in their seats, I felt the words choke in my throat. He leaned back, casually, as if this were nothing more than a pleasant dinner. "Tell me," he said, "how much do you know of your mother's early days here? How she met my father?" The question was a knife cloaked in silk. I steadied myself and answered, "She was brilliant. She brought vision, research, hope. Without her, none of this would exist." For the first time, something flickered in his expression, an echo of memory, perhaps even regret. "She was brilliant," he agreed. Then his tone shifted, cold and precise. "And yet she was careless. One mistake, and the entire company nearly collapsed. My father carried the burden." Heat rose in my chest. I wanted to scream that it was a lie, that I'd seen the proof, her signature on those patents, her ideas stolen. Instead, I forced my voice steady. "Your father carried the company, but my mother carried the truth." The air thickened. A server placed the second course, seared salmon gleaming beneath the chandelier. But the food was only theater. The true feast was the game being played between us. Maxwell reached into his jacket and slid an envelope across the table. Its wax seal glistened like fresh blood under the lights. "Consider this," he said. "A new agreement. A chance to prove your loyalty once and for all." My stomach knotted. The envelope felt heavier than stone. My instinct screamed not to touch it, yet my fingers brushed the seal. The paper was thick, expensive, binding. "Open it," Maxwell urged. His voice was smooth, but his eyes gleamed with challenge. "Show everyone here that you trust me." The room seemed to lean closer. My hands trembled. I thought of Daniel's warning, of my mother's photograph, of Sarah begging me to be careful. If I opened it now, I might chain myself forever to his world. If I refused, I might not walk out of this ballroom at all. Slowly, Deliberately, I pushed the envelope back toward him. "Some agreements deserve to be reviewed in private," I said. His smile thinned, cold as winter steel. "So cautious," he murmured. "Almost as if you don't trust me." A ripple of whispers spread through the hall. I felt their judgment sear my skin, their curiosity sharpening into suspicion. My chest tightened, but I kept my gaze locked on Maxwell's. He tapped the envelope once with his finger, a soft sound that echoed like thunder. "The choice is yours. Sign, and the future is secure. Refuse, and you risk being nothing more than your mother was, a forgotten name." The chandelier glittered above us, each crystal catching firelight like sparks of judgment. My throat ached, my heart raced, and every instinct screamed that the walls were closing in. I reached for the envelope again, hand trembling. The silence of the ballroom pressed down like a weight. I slid my nail under the seal, the wax cracking like a gunshot. The first line stared up at me. "By signing below, you accept full responsibility for all confidential directives." My breath caught. This wasn't just an agreement. It was a trap, one that demanded my silence, my compliance, my very soul. I glanced up. Maxwell's eyes glittered, triumphant. He leaned forward slightly, whispering so only I could hear. "Sign, and your future is guaranteed." I slid the seal aside, the paper crackling louder than any alarm. The room seemed to lean in as I revealed the first line. "By signing below." A chill swept through me as I realized this wasn't just a contract, it was a confession he demanded. Maxwell's eyes glittered with triumph as he whispered, "Sign, and your future is guaranteed." And in that heartbeat between promise and betrayal, I understood the true cost of his generosity. The ink glistened like fresh blood on the page. My hand shook as I hovered over the line where my name should go. I knew that once I signed, there would be no return to who I had been. And yet, the silence of the ballroom demanded an answer. The paper lay open before me, its words stark and merciless beneath the chandelier's glow. My fingers gripped the pen Henry slid across the table, its golden nib catching the light. The room around us had gone, eerily still. The clinking of silverware had ceased, the whispers had faded. Dozens of eyes now pinned me to my seat, waiting to see if I would fold. I stared at the signature line, my name faintly printed in italics beneath it. May Turner. It looked so fragile there, so ordinary, yet the weight of it threatened to crush me. Once ink filled that space, everything would change. Henry leaned back, composed as ever. "A contract is nothing more than a promise," he said, his voice carrying through the silence. "And promises, May, are what shape empires." My chest tightened. Empires built on stolen legacies, on buried truths, on my mother's erased name. Still, I felt the pull of the promise he dangled. Security, power, a future beyond the scraps I had once survived on. Daniel's warning rang in my mind. Don't let him bind you like he bound her. My mother's smile in the photograph burned behind my eyes. She had trusted once, and it destroyed her. Was I about to repeat her fate? My hand trembled as I lowered the pen, the ink threatening to spill with each breath. I felt the weight of the entire ballroom pressing down, the judgment of strangers who didn't know my story, but would remember my choice forever. Henry's voice cut through the pounding in my ears. "No one survives in my world without allegiance. Sign, and you belong. Refuse, and you will be devoured." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. My grandmother's voice whispered, "Kindness is the last thing poverty can steal." But kindness felt so small here, so fragile against the machinery of power. Could compassion survive inside a contract of shadows? My fingers tightened around the pen. Slowly, painfully, I pressed the nib to the page. The first stroke of my signature glistened like fresh blood. My stomach twisted. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw the paper back in his face. But instead, I finished the letters. May Turner etched into the contract like a sentence passed. Gasps rippled through the room. Henry's smile deepened, slow and certain, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. He closed the folder with deliberate care and tucked it under his arm. "Well done," he murmured, though the words felt less like praise and more like possession. Applause broke out around us, polite, rehearsed, soulless. I forced myself to sit upright, though my insides quaked. I had given him what he wanted, but I had also chained myself in ways I didn't yet understand. After the dinner, Henry walked beside me down the long marble corridor, our footsteps echoing. He spoke casually, as though we were old friends. "Tonight was the first step, May. You've proven you can handle pressure. Soon you'll prove you can handle power." I swallowed hard. "And if I can't?" He stopped, turning to face me. His eyes, sharp as knives, cut into mine. "Then you'll break. And broken things in my world don't last long." The words chilled me, but I nodded faintly, masking my fear. The contract bound me now. My survival depended on pretending I wasn't already drowning. That night I lay awake in my apartment, the pen still in my hand. The ink had dried, but the weight of it hadn't. The pages replayed in my mind like a nightmare, each clause a reminder that I had chosen survival over freedom. Sarah noticed my silence. Her brow furrowed. "What did you sign?" she whispered. I couldn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because admitting it aloud would make it too real. Instead, I stared out the window at the city lights, each one a star burning in a universe I no longer belonged to. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. As I traced the ink of my name in my mind, a cold truth settled over me. I wasn't just working for Henry now. I belonged to him. And though I had signed for security, what I had really written was a surrender. The ink had bound me to his empire. And in the silence of the night, I realized something far more terrifying. He hadn't shown me the true cost yet. The ink was barely dry on my contract when Henry called me into his office. He didn't hand me congratulations. He handed me a mission. This wasn't paperwork or polite dinners. This was trial by fire. And for the first time, I realized he didn't just want loyalty. He wanted transformation. Henry's office loomed like a cathedral of glass and steel. I stepped inside, with the weight of my signature still pressing down on my chest. The contract was done, sealed, and yet I felt no freedom, only the echo of chains tightening. Henry stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he commanded with a glance. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "May, it's time for your first test." The words coiled in my gut. My pulse quickened. I'd expected orientation, maybe training, perhaps even silence while my signature cooled. Not this. Not already. He turned, his gaze sharp but calm. "There's a community kitchen in the South District. Struggling. Underfunded. On the brink of collapse. I want you to take it over." I blinked, stunned. "Me?" "Yes." He placed a folder on the desk and slid it toward me. Inside were financial records, photos of peeling walls, lists of unpaid bills. "You'll have resources. Staff. But the leadership, the vision, that's yours." I swallowed hard, flipping through the pages. I saw faces of children waiting in line, volunteers overwhelmed, meals running out before everyone was fed. My chest ached. This wasn't just numbers. It was lives. Henry's voice cut through my thoughts. "You've shown compassion in small ways. Bread shared in a cafe. Loyalty signed on paper. Now I need to know if that compassion can scale." I raised my eyes to his. "And if I fail?" His smile was thin. "Then you're just another bleeding heart who doesn't belong at my table." The air thickened. My hands trembled, but I nodded. "I'll do it." He studied me for a long moment, then handed me a key. A real one, brass, heavy, engraved with the Ashton crest. "This unlocks the South District kitchen. Don't lose it." I clutched it, its weight both promise and burden. The next morning, I took the subway across town. The South District was another world. Graffiti on cracked walls, the smell of oil and smoke, children kicking a tattered ball between broken streetlights. The kitchen itself was a squat brick building with peeling paint and boarded windows. Volunteers greeted me with tired eyes, their aprons stained, their voices strained. "We've been waiting for someone to care," one woman said softly as she led me inside. The place was worse than the photos. Leaky ceilings, empty shelves, an oven that sputtered more than it cooked. I walked through slowly, absorbing every detail. It wasn't just a kitchen, it was survival for this neighborhood. And right now, it was failing. I rolled up my sleeves. The hours blurred as I scrubbed counters, organized supplies, and listened to the volunteers' stories. They didn't need a boss. They needed hope. By evening, we had managed one small miracle: hot stew for 50 families. The children's laughter as they ate filled the space with warmth the broken walls couldn't contain. I watched them, heart swelling. For the first time since signing that contract, I felt purpose again. But as the night wore on, doubt crept in. Was this truly Henry's test? Or was it another trap, a stage designed to measure not just my effort, but my breaking point? When I returned home, exhaustion clung to me. But so did something else: determination. If he wanted to test me, I would not fail. Not for Henry, but for the faces I'd seen today. The next morning, I walked into Henry's office, smelling faintly of broth and bleach. He raised an eyebrow, clearly noting it. "And?" "We served every family that came," I said, standing straighter than I felt. "But the building is crumbling. They need repairs, funding, equipment." His lips curved faintly. "And you think you can provide that?" "I know I can," I said firmly. "If you let me." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Curiosity, maybe even respect. He leaned back in his chair. "Very well. But understand, May, this isn't charity. This is strategy. Compassion is only powerful when it's controlled." His words chilled me, but I held my ground. As I left his office, the brass key heavy in my pocket, I understood what the test truly meant. It wasn't about soup or kitchens. It was about proving whether my compassion could survive in his ruthless world. And deep down, I knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The real trials hadn't even started. The fire started with a spark no one saw coming. In the dead of night, the South District kitchen became a furnace of betrayal. As smoke curled into the sky, I realized kindness had painted a target on my back. And from the ashes, Henry's true game revealed itself. The third week had barely begun when the smell of smoke woke me. My phone buzzed violently on the nightstand, lighting up with frantic messages. "May, it's the kitchen. Come quick. Fire everywhere. We can't stop it. Please hurry." My heart seized. I threw on the nearest clothes, grabbed my keys, and bolted into the night. The cab ride blurred past in streaks of red and gold sirens. By the time I arrived, the South District kitchen was engulfed. Flames licked the night sky, sparks shooting upward like dying stars. Volunteers stood outside, coughing, eyes wide with horror as firefighters wrestled hoses against the inferno. I pushed through the crowd, throat burning from the smoke. "What happened?" I shouted. "No idea," a young man cried, tears streaking through soot. "1 minute we were locking up, the next, it just went up." My chest clenched. I stared at the building, our fragile miracle reduced to a pyre. The children we'd fed days ago, the hope we'd sparked, all threatened to vanish in the blaze. A firefighter grabbed my arm. "Back." "It's not safe." I staggered back, choking, my eyes blurring. Ash rained like black snow, coating my hands, my clothes, my soul. And then, across the street, I saw him. Henry. Standing calm in the shadows, his suit immaculate, his eyes reflecting firelight. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched. My stomach dropped. The pieces clicked with brutal clarity. This wasn't an accident. This was orchestrated. My test wasn't about saving the kitchen. It was about watching it burn. I stumbled toward him, rage and grief colliding. "You did this," I hissed. His expression remained unreadable. "I warned you, May. Compassion must be controlled. You poured it recklessly into a dying place. Now you see what happens." My fists shook. People depended on this. Children depended on this. He tilted his head. "And now they'll depend on you even more. You see? Fire destroys, but it also creates opportunity. The community will look to you to rebuild, to lead, to rise from ashes." His calmness was worse than cruelty. It was calculation. He hadn't tested my compassion. He was testing my resilience. Would I crumble with the kitchen, or claw my way out stronger? Tears stung my smoke-scorched eyes. "You could have helped us, funded repairs, restored the building." "And then what?" he cut in sharply. "You'd have learned nothing. Leadership isn't about fixing what exists. It's about building something new from ruin. That, May, is why this fire is your first true gift." I shook my head, disbelief flooding me. "You call this a gift?" He stepped closer, his silhouette framed by the blaze. "You wanted purpose. Now you have it. Rebuild. Take the ashes and make them into something no one can ignore. Prove that your kindness isn't weakness. Prove it to me. And to yourself." My body trembled, every instinct screaming to scream, to hit, to collapse. But the sight of the volunteers, huddled, hopeless, coughing against the smoke, anchored me. They needed strength, not despair. I drew a ragged breath. "Fine," I whispered. "I'll rebuild. Not for you, for them, for us." A flicker of something, approval, perhaps pride, crossed his features. He leaned in, voice low. "Good. Because the real world doesn't reward survivors. It crowns rebuilders." And with that, he turned and walked into the night, the fire's glow chasing his retreating figure. I stayed until dawn, watching the flames smolder into embers, watching firefighters declare the building a loss. The volunteers clung to each other, weary but unbroken. I gathered them, voice hoarse but steady. "We're not finished," I told them. "This isn't the end. This is the beginning. We'll build again, stronger, together." They nodded, hesitant but hopeful, their trust flickering like the last sparks in the ash. When I finally returned home, my clothes reeked of smoke, my hair stiff with soot. I collapsed onto my mattress, the brass key heavy in my pocket. The key to nothing now. Or maybe, the key to everything. Because Henry was right about one thing. Fire destroys, but it also reveals. And in that night of fire and ashes, I saw Henry's game clearly for the first time. He wasn't testing my loyalty. He was molding me, shaping me into something he could use, sharpen, unleash. And I knew, with terrifying clarity, that the next test would burn even hotter. As I drifted into restless sleep, the acrid smoke still clinging to my lungs, my phone buzzed with a new message. "Rebuilding begins tomorrow. Report to my office at 9. My pulse thundered. Tomorrow the ashes would settle. Tomorrow Henry's true plan would begin. And tomorrow I would find out if I was his protege, or his pawn. If this roller coaster of twists left your heart racing, hit like and subscribe with the bell turned on so you're first in line for our next jaw-dropping tale. Drop a comment below, telling me which moment stole your breath. Share this video with anyone who craves a good plot twist, and follow me on Instagram/Twitter for exclusive behind-the-scenes peeks and sneak preview spoilers you won't want to miss.